So guys, over the course of my channel, I have made countless theories. Like actual theory videos, there's probably like 100 or so in total. But when you include things like theories in chapter reviews, reading comments, other things, it's truly profound. But some theories that I still like, that I still enjoy, that I still believe in, don't really get any views anymore. And it can be kind of hard to find them. So here is a remastered sort of compilation of theories that I think are still relevant. Let me know if you enjoy. Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, the craziest thing I think about Pluton is over the years that we speculated about this ancient weapon, like, I can't think of anything that is more divergent. The thoughts of the community is more divergent from what we've actually been given in the story. And I think that there's good reason for that, but it's kind of funny. Like, one of the few things that we actually know from the story about Pluton, supposedly, is that Pluton is a ship. It's a ship with designs, you can make it. Some ancient shipwright from Water 7 designed it. And I guarantee you, if you ask the community, probably about 1 out of every 2 people thinks that Pluton is probably not like a ship. So some of you may be wondering, why exactly am I saying this? This is canon, this is confirmed information. Pluton is an actual ship. Be aware of the assumptions that you are making. Also be aware that the Void Century is the Void Century for a reason, and any information passed down over an extended period of time could be misleading. However, some of the language that Franky uses when describing the blueprints is interesting, and I think that it opens up possibility. I want you guys to note here that the translation, the actual translation from Japanese is very nuanced, and from Funimation to Viz and everywhere, the translation is slightly different. But Franky reveals that he has the blueprints of Pluton within his body. He shows them Pluton is on the cover. Lucci and Kaku see the blueprints and know that it's legit. Franky then goes on to say, Nico Robin, I now understand that you are not the demon who's trying to abuse the weapon like the rumor says. What the shipwrights of Water 7 have passed down from generation to generation is not how to make the weapon. We then have a flashback of a conversation between Franky and Iceberg. As long as there's a possibility that woman called Nico Robin will try to revive the existing weapon, those blueprints will be needed by the world to create an opposing force. We then pan back to the present day. Franky says, listen Spanda, if the ancient weapon falls into the hands of an idiot like you and starts its rampage, there needs to be another weapon to counter and stop the first one. That was the wish of the designer. So ignoring the various specificities with each translation, I think that you have some overarching themes with this conversation. First, and I think just as important as anything else, Franky begins this conversation by acknowledging that the rumors surrounding Nico Robin were false. I personally think that there's a reason Oda included this as a preface to the conversation, and you could potentially relate it to the Pluton itself. The rumors about the Pluton are misleading. So the name that I've given to Water 7's blueprints for many years is the counter Pluton, the opposing force. And in line with this, I think that it's important to point out that not once in the entire story did Franky refer to the blueprints as the blueprints for Pluton. And neither did Tom. If the shipwrights in Water 7 designed the Pluton and then feared that it could fall into the wrong hands and lead to the end of the world, would you design the same ship again? Or would you perhaps design a ship that is intended to kill the first? At the very least, my personal assumption is that the blueprints that Franky had are not the Pluton. It is a superior version of the same ship. At the very least, it only makes sense that designs that were created afterwards would have been improved. But the other element of this that is really interesting is they feared the power of the Pluton. So when they're designing this new one, you would think that they would be concerned about the same thing happening with this one. So it may be modified or changed in some way to make it less of a threat against the world, or simply more specialized. Its one purpose is to destroy the original Pluton and supposedly nothing else. One of the most baffling things in the story, it's very unique, it's very special, there's nothing like it in the entirety of the One Piece world. I'm talking about the Thousand Sunny, and I'm talking about Coup de Burst. Let's just say, hypothetically, there's a ship that exists or was created, and attached to it is some sort of fearsome weapon, a weapon that can literally destroy islands. In a battle on the sea using any regular ship, you just lose. Ships cannot move fast enough to dodge this weapon, capable of destroying islands, would level a hole in the ocean. And then you put strong people on the ship itself. The only way to combat the Pluton is to be able to get close enough to it that its weapon is not in range. The Thousand Sunny can do what an entire armada of ships can't. It can fly across the ocean. I believe that Franky memorized the blueprints and incorporated it in when he was building the Thousand Sunny, and that aspect specifically comes from the documents. Look, I think that this is absolutely brilliant. They're expecting a weapon, and Franky tells us verbatim that these blueprints aren't meant to create the weapon. So actually building the blueprints and incorporating it into the Sunny, they would never suspect. But I think that this also suggests something else. A lot of people think of the Pluton as a ship, but with this theory, it separates it into its parts. Yes, the weapon is attached to a ship. Yes, coup de burst is attached to the Thousand Sunny, and it has to be designed with those specifications in mind. But more than just ships, they're tools, they're attachments. If you want to refer to actual history, it's more so that somebody invented the cannon, and then the cannon was added to battleships. I know that some people are going to mention the gown cannon that the Sunny has. It can actually fire a coup de burst forward in order to destroy things. I'm assuming that this is not anywhere close to what the Pluton could do, but still it's incredible. We see pretty obviously that technology is slowly advancing in the world of One Piece. Beforehand, ships, the world government ships for instance, let's recall, relied on cannons. Now we see Vegapunk designing the Pacifista. Pacifistas have lasers, but so far we don't see anything that can actually destroy an entire island. I wonder if this is what Pluton actually is, the thing about it which makes it so fearsome. Not just because it's a ship. Being a ship is fun, it's novel, but the real key is the technology which made it an unrivaled weapon. But of course, this is just one theory. There are others. Some that don't require Oda to introduce anything new. But the same as before, I do expect some kind of twist. Oda will add something. He'll be creative. That is my expectation. So is there anything else that we can potentially speculate about Pluton, about a ship that would raise the hype level of the reveal? Something heavily foreshadowed, but at the same time, not intuitive. Not a thought that is pervasive in the community. Let me ask a question. Aside from whatever power that Pluton has that makes it a fearsome weapon, what else about it is also unique, which makes it the most unique ship in the entire story? The answer to this that I have is that Pluton is the oldest ship. The oldest ship that we presume was actually used, so I'm ignoring the Noah. Let's go back to the question that we've posed several times during this video. A question that we should have is, why did the makers of Pluton fear the Pluton falling into the wrong hands? Under what circumstance was its power used wrongly? The obvious answer to this is that Pluton is a ship and somebody stole it. But here's a less obvious answer, one that I find to be very intriguing. The makers of Pluton feared Pluton because it committed some sort of crime, and it committed this on its own. So I want to remind you guys that it is possible for a ship to develop its own spirit and act on its own. This is something that we got to see directly in Enies Lobby, the arc which related heavily to Pluton. The Going Merry was able to sail itself, and it developed this ability very, very quickly. From the moment that the Straw Hats began their adventure and started sailing on the Going Merry from the time of Water 7 and Enies Lobby, I mean, months had passed at most. I'm not actually going to count the time, but it did not take very long. Meanwhile, you have Pluton, which presumably sailed the seas for multiple years during the Void Century. It could have been decades. It's the oldest ship that we know of which was actually used. Franky described the legend of the Klabautermann in chapter 351. He explains, Klabautermann, he's a legend passed down among sailors, a sprite who lives only on ships that have been truly cared for and treated well. I guess you would call him an incarnation of the ship. He holds a wooden mallet in one hand and wears a sailor's raincoat. And when misfortune befalls the ship, he runs around and warns everyone. Sometimes they say he saves sailors' lives. But to be honest, this is the first for me. I've never heard of anyone who's seen him before. We know that Klabautermann are real, and legends are based in things that have actually occurred. There has been some example of a Klabautermann at some point. in the past. And I think that the Pluton could be an example. This thing is no joke, and we know that it can actually do things. In Skypiea, we saw that it fixed the Going Merry. It took off the wings that they used to travel up the knock-up stream, so it has a physical form. We also see later that it probably sailed the Going Merry all the way to Enies Lobby and back. I wonder if Pluton's Klabautermann is fully developed, essentially as powerful as this entity can be, making the Pluton fully autonomous, like a person. And like a person, it can make its own decisions, at least when nobody is sailing it. But Franky specifically says that there's legends that it saves crew members. So I wonder if the Pluton, in its attempt to save its crew members, might have been able to fire its weapon. Again, the designers of Pluton feared that the ship might have fallen into the wrong hands because maybe there was some event which suggested it. But maybe even the people of the Void Century aren't aware of the truth. The Pluton never fell into the wrong hands. The ship used itself. I think related to Wano, we see other examples of things which are potentially similar to this. We see that as a crew loves its ship, they can kind of bring it to life. Perhaps you could say that it inherits their will. Well, there's something awfully similar to this when regarding swords. But I think that there is a spectrum. And swords can develop distasteful personalities. They refer to these as cursed swords. Will the Pluton be our first example of a cursed ship in the world of One Piece? To see a cursed ship would not surprise me. Oda relies heavily on pirate lore when developing the story of One Piece, from actual pirates who existed, names, locations, as well as their stories or legends. One of the tropes of pirate stories is the ghost ship, basically a ship with no living crew aboard. The most famous ghost ship story was about the Flying Dutchman, but it also has this element of curse associated with this. In ocean lore, the sight of the Flying Dutchman is a portent of doom. I think that Oda has obviously used this legend on 3 different instances in the story. Of course, we have an actual Flying Dutchman in the story, but it was not a ghost ship, it was captained by fishmen. We also have Zunisha. The legend of the Flying Dutchman was that it was forced to sail the seas for eternity and could not make port, which is very relevant to Zunisha's command. So Zunisha in part seems to be inspired by the Flying Dutchman. And the other thing is the Going Merry. The Going Merry is the only true ghost ship that we have met in this story, but it isn't given this curse association. But another legend of the Flying Dutchman, and this is more familiar if you've watched Pirates of the Caribbean, but those who sail on the ship play dice with death itself. Pluton, or Pluto, is the literal god of the underworld in Roman mythology. It's another name for death itself. So there is one more way that I could see that Oda could take this, and I think that it would fit beautifully in the story.
Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, let's go back to Marineford. What was that conflict about? Saving Ace, yes, of course. But at its heart, it was, I think, more than that. To the government, Ace wasn't just a person, a pirate, a high-ranking member of the Whitebeard Pirates. Ace was a shadow of the man the world government feared above all others, his father, Gold D. Roger. His birth, they somehow knew, was significant. His death was necessary. They risked conflict with the man called the strongest in the world for the opportunity to kill somebody who could become far greater than that. As we learned in some of the recent chapters of One Piece, Roger was waiting for Joy Boy. Following the clues here is fun. They first learned of Joy Boy from the Poneglyph of Apology in Fishman Island, and then discovered who this person was by reading the story he left at Laughtail. But they discovered even more than this. They led us to believe Joy Boy was a person who lived in the distant past during the Void Century. His story is on the Poneglyphs. He wrote the Poneglyphs. But also Joy Boy was a person who does not yet exist. Odin tells us with startling precision, Joy Boy would come to Wano in 20 years' time. And so he prepared for that inevitability. We all assume that Luffy is Joy Boy, and here Joy Boy is, right on time. But I think that it's important to clarify, even though we learn these specifics from Odin, these are likely conclusions also made by Gold D. Roger. What Odin knows, what Odin learned, and how he learned it all along the same journey, the same path that Roger himself took with his crew, Odin being a part of that crew. And Fishman Island, they learned that Poseidon would be born in 10 years' time. This was 25 years before the beginning of the story. As Roger finally disbands the Roger Pirates, they again hear that Poseidon is not yet born and will take a further 15 years to grow. Again, 25 years before the current storyline, in 15 years plus 10 years, that's present day. Possibly it was from this that Odin knew the exact time that Joy Boy would arrive in Wano, because from the Sea Kings he learned the exact year that a great war would unfold. But the Sea Kings were not just waiting on Poseidon, they were anxious for the day that the two sovereigns would meet, the two kings. They believed surely this time it would go well. I would presume in this case it alludes to the conflict of the Void Century, likely a conclusion also reached by Roger and Odin, having at that time already read the true history and discovered the secrets of the world. 800 years ago, the Ancient Kingdom lost. The Ancient Kingdom, as well as the mermaid princess, the Ancient Kingdom's weapon, Poseidon. So it didn't go well, but this time it will. We don't know exactly where Odin and why Odin jumped to the conclusion that Joy Boy would return, but I presume it was by reading the poneglyphs, and then perhaps by hearing the Sea Kings also assumed that the two sovereigns would meet, meaning Joy Boy and Poseidon, in 25 years. And just in general, prophecies do actually exist in the world of One Piece. Charlet from Fishman Island can actually predict the future. This is an actual power that exists. So there remains the possibility that some prophecy may have been recorded on the poneglyphs. The prophecy of Joy Boy. But anyway, we see during Odin's flashback, Roger speculates, hearing the Sea Kings, that the voices they hear are speaking the truth, that somebody was going to be born and eventually surpass us. And this leads us right back to Ace. Roger says immediately after this, and that person that will eventually surpass us, who's going to be born, that person is going to be my son, even though I don't have a son yet. In Goldie Roger's opinion, what he actually believed, his son would become Joy Boy. And I think Roger's opinion is very influential. Roger, I believe, just the same as Odin, understood that in 25 years Joy Boy would return, and in so doing cause a great war that would shake the very foundations of this world. As Whitebeard hints in Marineford, the person Roger was waiting for, searching for, was probably a D, just like himself. We know that the poneglyphs explain the nature of D, and Roger later understands why the government would want to hide the fact that he was a D, calling him Gold Roger rather than Gold D Roger. Knowing that Joy Boy, probably a D, was not yet born, all Roger could do was wait and prepare the world for this person's return. And as it's sort of implied, one of his last acts before his execution was to simply have a son, to create Joy Boy, to change the next era. What we know for sure, guys, Roger did not hide his secrets. Immediately before disbanding the Roger Pirates, he tells his crew that he will seek out Whitebeard. And as we learned earlier in the story, during this meeting, Roger shared all that he had learned with Whitebeard. The meaning of D, the true history. Roger wanted certain people to know the truth, to help him prepare for the future. So for Whitebeard and Marineford, yes, he was saving a crew member, a son, and his treasure, part of his treasure. But I believe he also thought he was protecting Roger's dream, the One Piece. Roger believed that his son would become Joy Boy. Doubtless he told Whitebeard the very same thing. This is hinted at, as Squardo spoke to Whitebeard after stabbing him through the stomach. Squardo believed that Whitebeard saw Ace above everybody else. He believed that Whitebeard intended to make Ace king, and Whitebeard never contradicted him. I think that it's implied that, Whitebeard was trying to make Ace king. Whitebeard was trying to make Ace what Roger thought he would be, Joy Boy. And in fact, he even thought this: I can't be the strongest forever. If I can help one pirate achieve his destiny, my life will be complete. Isn't that enough? I think he's talking about Ace. Even below this, we can see it pans right to Ace. He believes, just as Roger believed, that Ace would surpass them. He was Joy Boy, and Whitebeard's duty to the world was to save him and protect him until his time came, even if it cost him his life and the lives of all of his other children. That was what Ace was worth. But I think that some people only think about this from one side. I don't think Whitebeard was the only person
who understood Ace's importance historically. Why was the world government so concerned with Ace that they would risk fighting the strongest man in the world? Why did the world government hunt down all of those who were connected to Roger? Why were they so sure that Roger had a secret child in the first place? And why exactly did they fear this child so much? If a prophecy is recorded on the poneglyphs, I would believe that the world government may also be aware of this prophecy. Maybe the government is just as aware as Roger, Odin, and Whitebeard that the great battle looms once more. Joy Boy will appear from among the D, and just as Roger assumes, his child would be the one to usher in this new era. Maybe the world government believes exactly the same thing. Among the celestial dragons, there exists a legend or a rumor, I don't know exactly what you would call it, but that the D are the natural enemies of God. God in this case referring to the celestial dragons. I think that they may be aware of Joy Boy's return and be acting based on that assumption. In this case, the government is not just killing the son of Roger. They are potentially killing the greatest threat to the entire organization that has ever or will ever exist. That has been foretold to come for over 800 years. That then I think becomes a battle surely worth it, even if the cost is great. But everything that I've explained up till now is not really the main topic of this theory. This is just sort of the prelude. The picture I painted for you of Marineford is now deeper than it was before, I think. Ace at the center of it all. A great war because people believed that he could be the person that changes the world forever. Let's talk about Roger some more, guys. What do you think Roger did in the time between finding Laughdale, disbanding his crew, and being executed, aside from talking to Whitebeard and making a child with Rouge? You know, in my opinion, surely he did more than this. We just, was it important or not? Did anything of significance occur? In my opinion, guys, I think Roger may have sought out other people similar to Whitebeard, people that he respected and or trusted or was interested in, and told them about the truth of the world. And it could also be possible that maybe he didn't seek out these people, but he told people who he happened to come across or meet randomly. I don't think Roger was looking to hide these secrets. I think he was just very selective about who he wanted to tell them to. And the specific person I have in mind here, guys, is Monkey D. Dragon. In chapter 507, Robin asked Rayleigh about Laughdale, the Will of D, and the Lost History. And Rayleigh has this to say: even if I told you the history now, there's nothing you can do about it. The answer you arrive at may be different from ours. Something about this scene strikes a chord for me. I believe there is a connection here with what Monkey D. Dragon said when first introduced in the story. Monkey D. Dragon says this: the world is waiting for our answer. Answer to what? Dragon doesn't ever specify, but we can speculate. I believe Dragon's answer and the answer Rayleigh talked about referred to the very same problem. Rayleigh learned the true history, the reason the government has erased this history, but to know this insinuates a desire to, quote, do something about it. He also suggests that there may be multiple solutions. You may arrive at a different answer than us. We know that the conflict of the Void Century related to what is now called the world government. At this time, skipping all the details, we assume them to have been the villains, and they won. And we also know Dragon directly opposes those who created the world government, the Celestial Dragons. Perhaps the Revolutionary Army is his answer after learning the truth and experiencing the world. I think that Oda made it clear enough that Rayleigh would have told the Straw Hats everything if they had wanted to know, and Roger was very upfront with Whitebeard. It doesn't seem impossible for Roger to have told somebody else, such as Dragon. And even further than this, Dragon is a D, and Roger likely believed that it could be he or his future child who would one day prove to be Joy Boy. Perhaps Roger met Dragon, who he knew was a D, and felt it necessary to explain it. We also know that Dragon was there on the day of Roger's execution, which is interesting in that he was the only person shown who was not a pirate. Also, when he first discovered his son, and he comments to himself, a pirate, eh? Not a bad idea. This is a revolutionary who sympathizes with pirates. Furthermore, the very first time Dragon appears in the story, the very first time, the narrator quotes Gold D. Roger, and all of this takes place again, at the island that Roger was executed.
Logtown. But there may be another conversation which alludes to this connection. In the Ace, Sabo, and Luffy flashback, Dragon arrives in Goa Kingdom just after the nobles there initiated a plot to burn Trash Mountain and all of the people who lived there while blaming it on pirates. He soon meets Sabo, who explains the situation and, ashamed, laments ever having been born an aristocrat. Dragon tells Sabo this: "I understand. I was born in this country too, but I still don't have the power to change it. And as Rayleigh says, even if you knew the truth, there is nothing you can do about it." There is probably a lot of similarity to be found here, in my opinion. The world government founded by nobles and aristocrats, and the ancient kingdom connected in some way to pirates, destroyed amid what was most probably lies. But anyway, guys, I feel that there is a strong connection between Roger and Dragon. We obviously haven't read the true history, but the speculation based on what we know is the Celestial Dragons did all sorts of wrong, the ancient kingdom fought against them, eventually lost, and from their ashes the king's power only grew and the world government was created. The reason the world government does not want the poneglyphs deciphered is by reading them you would be inspired to declare war against the government and the Celestial Dragons. Just as Rayleigh said, even if you knew the truth, there is nothing you could do about it. Discovering the truth leads to war, which is exactly what Whitebeard mentioned or hinted when he revealed that the One Piece does in fact exist in Marineford. Sengoku, you and the world government fear the great war that will come to this world one day. Somebody will find the One Piece. Roger was the first to discover the truth after almost 800 years. Just a few years later, Dragon created the Revolutionary Army to do just this. Declare war on these Celestial Dragons, just as you would think that the poneglyphs would tell you to. And that would be a challenging feat indeed, one that certainly the Strats, at the time that they talked to Rayleigh, wouldn't have been able to even contemplate. In a way, guys, I think Dragon may be a disciple of Roger. And so, guys, if that were true, and Dragon had a conversation with Roger in which Roger explained all that he knew, he would know that the time for the prophesized Great War is now. That's what Odin believed, and that's what I believe that Roger believed. Is it any coincidence that the Revolutionary Army chooses this year to attack the Reverie? Is Dragon trying to be Joy Boy? Or is he just another person trying to set the stage for when Joy Boy is supposed to appear? Or does Dragon believe in Joy Boy at all? He may have heard these stories from Roger, but that doesn't mean that he reached the same conclusions Roger did and believes the same things. Perhaps Dragon has, for the most part, ignored the prophecy and relied on the history and a belief that the Celestial Dragons must be defeated and that he is the one that needs to do this because he has the ability, and it just so happens to have culminated now. Or does Dragon believe that his son Monkey D. Luffy is Joy Boy? I'm not entirely convinced about this one. I think that it's worthy of discussing because it's relevant to this theory, but Dragon hasn't really taken a hands-on approach with Luffy's life, but I don't know how significant that is or is not. Roger really never influenced his son Ace, and yet still believed he would be the one to change the world. In my opinion, one of the more epic moments from Marineford, there was many of them, but for me personally, was the moment that Whitebeard acknowledged Luffy. Luffy showed up, and Whitebeard, for the most part, I think dismissed him. But after seeing Luffy fight and his determination, Luffy made a believer out of Whitebeard. Whitebeard came to Marineford, I believe, believing that Ace was supposed to be Joy Boy. But in the middle of that fight, I think that Whitebeard saw the potential that he was wrong, and that person may be Ace's little brother, Luffy. He was for sure another worthy candidate. And so just like Ace, Whitebeard made a point to protect him. An equally cool moment would be if Dragon, in a similar situation, saw Luffy in the very same way. But let's go back to the idea that Dragon believes himself to be, or is trying to be Joy Boy, or just trying to do what he thinks is right, which in a way would follow the footsteps of Joy Boy. I think the poneglyphs told Roger that Joy Boy would have, by his side, the three ancient weapons, Poseidon, Uranus, and Pluton. After Roger learned Shirahoshi was not yet born, he comments that they were too early, meaning it was impossible for Roger to be Joy Boy and to accomplish whatever feat he is supposed to do because Poseidon wasn't here and couldn't be by his side. Joy Boy and the ancient weapons' destinies or fates are connected. If he came to discover Shirahoshi was an ancient weapon, what would happen? would Dragon demand to use her as a weapon, despite Otohime's conclusion that the ancient weapons were never intended to take lives, but rather instead save them? Based on this theory, Dragon possesses a lot of knowledge, but how he takes this knowledge could be very different to how we as readers or other characters in the story have taken it. We don't see the ancient weapons as weapons, but Dragon may. Weapons to be used in order to destroy evil. If you remember, a noteworthy character who happens to know that Shirahoshi is the ancient weapon Poseidon is Caribou, and during his cover story, what did Caribou become? He became a revolutionary. To what lengths would Dragon go in order to destroy the world government and the celestial dragons? And what kind of moment would that lead to in the story? To me, these feel like important questions to be asking right about now. Kind of a beautiful thought in my mind. Oda level thinking is for essentially Roger to have had 3 disciples of varying natures. On one hand, you have Whitebeard, who essentially believed what Roger believed, that his son would one day become Joy Boy, and tasked himself with his protection. And then on the other hand, you have Dragon, who has taken this in a completely different direction, who either believes himself to be Joy Boy or doesn't believe in Joy Boy. But regardless of this, has taken a very active role in creating the events that Joy Boy is supposed to be a part of or responsible for. And then lastly, you would have Shanks, who chose somebody different and basically allowed destiny to play out as it would. All 3 of them had their very own answers.
政府はてめえの首を欲しがってるぜ。世界は我々の答えを待っている。
Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So,
The point of this video, what eventually we're going to try and do, is simply make the video 10 minutes. You guys know whether I failed or not. Please. But we're wasting time. No, this isn't about making a 10-minute video. However, that is my objective as well. Today we want to talk about Franky. This is going to relate directly to the last video that I made that was 50 minutes. Essentially what you need to understand from that video is that the strides are going to connect literally everyone together. Every group, every faction, everything. But while it's not necessary to watch that video, I do recommend that you do so because I would like you to watch both videos. Do I need another reason? Link in the description. You can watch it after this one. Called The Straw Hat Army Will Be Insane. So one of the important concepts that I discussed that are relevant to this is that Oda's going to give even more connections to the current Straw Hat members, the members of the crew themselves, in much the same way that Sanji became a Vinsmoke. Zoro's probably related to the country of Wano, maybe royalty, and Oda's decked out Luffy in pretty much every way that you can imagine, and he may not be done. Obviously, the Straw Hats already have some connections that are very noteworthy. Robin is the last person from Ohara. Franky trained under Tom, who happened to also have the blueprints to the counter Pluton. Usopp is already the son of Yasopp, who is a member of the red-haired pirate Yonko crew. Right, these things are already built in there. I'm just going to suggest that there may be more. But in this one, we want to add to Franky, because I think that there is room to. This is just an aside, but I think that names are important in the world of One Piece. Oda uses names as actual plot points pretty commonly. So just some examples of this, we've already talked about Zoro and Sanji. I think that Zoro becomes Shimotsuke Zoro or something like that. Sanji is now Vinsmoke Sanji. You have this whole concept of the D initial, which is related to names, and it's taken even further with Trafalgar Law because he is not only given the middle initial of D, but also a middle name of water. This isn't just true of Straw Hats, you see this with Momonosuke. Momonosuke was just Momonosuke for a long while until it was Kozuki Momonosuke. Sometimes you have examples like Ace, where it's Portgas D Ace, but that name was incorrect, at least paternally. We're not going to go through all these theories, but I just want you to understand that names are important in One Piece. Oda uses them commonly to create hype. And perhaps the most unique example of a weird name in the story of One Piece, or at least weird in how it's used, is Franky. We know Franky's real name. His real name is Cutty Flam. But the fascinating thing about this name is that Franky has not used it for near enough 20 years. And Oda created this scenario in a very natural way that totally makes you dismiss the importance of the name itself. Iceberg asked Franky to drop the name Cutty Flam because it tied him to Tom and thereby the blueprints of Pluton. Doing it this way removes any sense of possible secrecy. In a way, it's kind of an inversion of Sanji, where Sanji's last name was missing. Well, Franky's last name is missing in a very different way. Most of the world simply does not know because on every Franky bounty poster, the name is Franky. The only people who appeared to know Franky's real name, besides Iceberg, was the world government. With all of their connections, they could only barely discover this fact, because Cutty Phlegm is assumed dead. And even further than this, and I find this to be interesting, if somebody were to recognize Franky from his youth, they would have a difficult time putting a face to actual Franky because that dude has been experimenting on himself for a very long time. He looks nothing, especially now, nothing like he should. So basically what we're speculating here is the name Cutty Phlegm is important. It's potentially recognizable or significant in some way, but in what way and why don't we already know? There are 3 theories that I think are prevalent about Franky. Franky is the child of Vegapunk. I like this theory quite a lot. But its main issue is that Franky reveals that his parents were pirates and that they kicked him off their ship, and it doesn't vibe with me totally. There's a theory that Franky's family are in the Revolutionary Army. I don't like this theory that much. And there's a theory that Franky is a descendant of the famous shipwright family from the Void Century, the one Din tells us is responsible for designing the Noah and likely designed the Pluton. I personally think that this family was a family of fishmen and relates to Din and Tom, not Franky. So being unsatisfied with the theories that I've heard, I'm looking for something that I really like. And in this video, I found it. And I'm going to speculate something that I'm 100% sure you have never heard before. The idea is that Franky's family are big-time players in the One Piece underground. So don't judge too quickly, let's lay out the evidence. And let's begin with what we know about the underground. Little known fact, the first time that the underground came up in the story of One Piece was through Franky. He mentioned the black market where he purchased Adam's Wood, which he ultimately built the Thousand Sunny out of. First mention of the underground in the entire story. It didn't really come back up, or we didn't really see it again until Sabaody, when we got introduced to the Human House, which was owned by Doflamingo, who we later learned was perhaps the most important player in the underground, going by the alias of Joker. Now, there's 2 really important concepts here, right? First off, a pirate, Doflamingo, was a major player in the underground. Second off, Doflamingo, despite already being a pirate, had a codename specific to the underground called the Joker. Not the only character that we know that had an alias. Mother Carmel was known as the Mountain Witch. So there is likely to be other pirates and other characters who go by a particular alias, are known by their underground alias. But I just want to take a moment to make you understand just how prevalent this concept of the underground is in the story of One Piece, even though it hasn't been a crazy highlighted thing. We start off in Alabasta with dance powder. It wasn't associated with the black market or the underground, but we knew that it was an illegal substance, and with everything else in the story, you can later come to the conclusion that dance powder was a thing that was sold on the black market through the underground. Obviously leading into Water 7, we'll talk more about Franky, but Adam's Wood. I think that more than anything, this arc introduces the concept of localized underground. Pretty much every major country or major area has its own market. Then of course we see the Human House in Sabaody. This leads directly into Amazon Lily, where we meet somebody who was sold as a slave. This takes us into the New World, where again the concept comes up once more with mermaids. Caribou trying to be real dodgy. We then have an arc which is pretty much solely dedicated to the concept of the underground. Even though we don't get a payoff necessarily, I don't feel like we're paid off to the concept, like it feels resolved within the story. Caesar selling Smiley, Shino Kuni, and we even see him broadcast this to potential buyers, brokers. This of course was Oda's segue into the concept of Smile Fruit, which related directly to Doflamingo as probably the biggest trader, biggest player in the underground, connected to literally everybody, including the world government, Celestial Dragon, Cypher Pole, and Kaido, among others. We also learned that the Revolutionary Army has taken an interest in underground dealings. They're looking for the weapons providers which are sparking wars on various islands that they're associated with. Ultimately, they may not know this at this point, but they're looking for Kaido. We know that now. But in this arc, we also learn that the underground doesn't just exist within the New World, it doesn't just exist within the Grand Line, it exists in the Four Blues as well, because we see the Barrels Pirates sell the Opi Opi no Mi black market in the North Blue. But of course, most of this does actually spider out of the New World, and we see this even more clearly in the next arc in Whole Cake Island. Big Mom is associated with Underground Emperor. She invites them to her tea party. I think here we get a greater sense of the multitude of products that the Underground provides. Stussy, Pleasure District, Jigra, who is an organs dealer, Mother Carmel, who provides orphans. Dufeld was a loan shark. They call Drug Piccolo the Major Undertaker. Personally, I think he holds a scythe. I think that he is an assassin. A theory that we made a long time ago that I really like is that he's a bounty hunter, but he's the black version of a bounty hunter because he takes bounties that are illegal, which I would assume would include law-abiding people. But I think that mainly what you can take away from Whole Cake Island is this underground really starts to become its own entity. It grows into something that should play a role in the future of the story, and for sure that we know that it will, at least in one way. Stussy, a member of CP0, is deep undercover as an underworld emperor. And we see that the people that are purchasing Mother Carmel's products or orphans is in fact, again, Cypherpol and the world government. None of this I find to be breaking news because of course we had the human auction house where celestial dragons were actually purchasing slaves. This is additive when we go to Wano, we discover for sure that the celestial dragons in Cypherpol are dealing with Kaido purchasing the weapons to send to countries, so it leads to the pretty clean and obvious theory that the world government is actually supporting the underground. They are a part of it and they rely upon it. The Revolutionary Army has caught on to this and is likely wanting to reveal this to the world at some point in time to undermine their credibility and turn the world against them. But outside of this, I think that the underground should come up again. We should meet new characters. They should be involved in some way. So this leads us into talking about Franky and his potential underground family. We know that Franky is from the South Blue, but we've already argued, right, that the underground extends into all the blues. Another thing that we didn't bring up was Capone Beige, a member of the 5 gangster families from the West Blue, right? So there was an underground in the South Blue as well. Franky says that his parents are pirates, but pirates have been deeply involved in the underground at multiple instances in the story. Most notably, of course, Doflamingo. You can tell me that the impression that you got from Franky's whole story is that his parents weren't all that important, and that's fair enough. But you have to bear in mind that Franky is over 30 years old. His parents abandoned him when he was 4 years old. 30 years has passed. Another intriguing theory which is worth bringing up is that you get the sense from Doflamingo that the underground has only grown in recent years. He says business is booming. And we also know that Doflamingo was an integral member of the underground in the first place. His connections, his ability made everything prosper. All of this probably wasn't relevant until Doflamingo was around 20 years old. Doflamingo is 40 in the current storyline, so 20 years ago. Again, Franky was abandoned 30 years ago, so you have a time period for which the whole industry could grow, including the Flam role in that. And if they are high up at all within the underground, it is most likely that they will have aliases. Which, as a fun little discussed fact, Franky already has his alias and has for years. His name is Gutty Flam, not Franky. And this leads us into the actual arc itself, where I think that it paints pretty clearly that Franky is the leader of the underground in Water 7. An interesting thing that we see in Punk Hazard is we see the brokers that are bidding for Caesar's weapon, and they all wear masks. Franky is introduced with a mask and an alias. Like, this seems so obvious in retrospect, but Franky was literally a part of the underground when we first met him. He scrapped ships and then sold that on the black market, which is how he knows how to purchase the Adams wood in the black market. The underground is pretty intimately associated with gangster activity. You see this with Capone Beige. You also see this in Wano with the Yakuza. And Franky in Water 7 is introduced as essentially a gangster. His family, the Franky family, has all of those motifs. And here's another little known connection about various things that we know regarding the underground. There's an association of illicit activity taking place in houses. the human auction house in Sabaody, the toy house in Dressrosa, Sheep's house for Mother Carmel, and then we see the Franky house. But here's the most fascinating thing. Franky is not just this way at 30 years old. He is this way from pretty much the moment that Tom adopts him. He certainly didn't learn any of these behaviors from either Tom or Iceberg. And another interesting fact is that before Tom even adopted Franky or taught him anything, Franky was already a skilled builder, interested in creating weapons. Weapons that we now know are a fundamental trade within the underground. We see this with Doflamingo giving weapons to various countries created in Wano. We also see this with Caesar Clown creating various kinds of weapons as well. So long story short is I think that Franky picked up on these gang habits and introduced himself into the underworld because that is what he knew as a child from his parents. Now, who are they and what they do? Your guess is as good as mine, right? We don't know. This is purely speculation territory. However, it has not been explained how Franky is able to piece together scraps in order to create weapons. We also see after he tries to stop the puffing Tom, his body is damaged beyond repair, things aren't working, and he already knows, it appears, he already knows how to fix himself, how to give him metal parts. So I think that the Flam family, Franky's parents, are specialists in human augmentation. You have characters like Gotti from the Fire Tank Pirates. Fire tanks are associated with the underworld. Gotti lost his arm and it's replaced with a weapon. I think that this is the kind of work that the Franky family would do. You could say that we've seen other people demonstrate these capabilities throughout the story, for instance Queen or Vegapunk with the Pacifista, but neither of these seem for sale or like sort of a black market variant. It could also be true, since we know that the world government is connected to the underground, that Vegapunk works hand in hand with Franky's actual parents, or some other family member, for instance a brother or a sister. But yeah guys, that's the theory. I think that it would be really cool if Cuddy Flam, Franky's parents and or family were associated with the underground, potentially even an underground emperor who goes by an alias.
Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So,
I'm sure you already know, but Luffy is slowly bringing the world together. And he's not even trying to do that, which makes it all the more impressive. And by the conclusion of the story, I expect Luffy to have essentially the most impressive crew ever created since probably the Void Century. And by crew here, we're stretching the definition. Basically, Luffy's subordinates are going to be many, from all sorts of different walks of life, groups, factions. The Straw Hats are going to be the string that ties literally everyone together. I think that I don't need to argue that this is a theme of the story, right? And it is a story, so because it's a story and Oda's the author, he can make things look really pretty. It doesn't necessarily have to be realistic. So this is a somewhat difficult video to label, but basically I want to look at every clan, race, or tribe, or faction within the world of One Piece, or anything that Oda has sort of highlighted as distinct groups in the story, and I want to try to connect them to the Straw Hat Pirates. The Straw Hat Pirates in this case being defined as either the crew itself, the Grand Fleet, and maybe we'll include some twists and turns along the way. So this is kind of needless fluff for the video, but I just want to establish this, that I look at the Whitebeard Pirates as sort of my ideal setup for what the Straw Hats might look like at the end of the story in a final battle sort of context. Whitebeard had 16 division commanders, but it's made pretty clear, I think, that the division commanders were members of Whitebeard's actual crew. So it's essentially like looking at the members of the Straw Hats themselves, the ones that you're familiar with that travel to every island together. I'm uncertain of the specificities here, but when we're in Odin's flashback and Odin joins the Whitebeard Pirates, you can see that there was a time at least in which they didn't have multiple ships, and then sometime after that, Odin became the 2nd Division commander. The main difference being is that Whitebeard was on the seas for a very long time, and he liked to collect strays, and I think that there's a number somewhere north of 1,000 that were like legitimate members of the Whitebeard Pirates themselves. With so many members, they needed multiple ships. So the true crew, as you would think of it, they individually got their own ships and their own sort of hierarchies underneath Whitebeard. But what makes them like Whitebeard Pirates is that they fly the Whitebeard flag, which is different from, say, allied captains, or I suppose the proper term is subordinate captain. allied captains, Whitebeard had those as well, flew their own flag. So if you look at something like the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, Straw Hat Grand Fleet are not Straw Hat pirates because they don't fly Luffy's flag on their ship itself. They have their own names. The Bartow Club, for instance, the Beautiful Pirates. The Grand Fleet are what the Wikipedia refers to as subordinate captains. The division commanders are like the actual crew. And the final constituents, was made up Whitebeard's side of the fight in Marineford, are just simple allies, right? That aren't necessarily friends or subordinate to Whitebeard, but they are fighting together for some sort of unified cause. I imagine in a final battle context with the Straw Hats, we're going to see something similar. You're going to have the actual Straw Hats there. You're going to see subordinate captains, the Grand Fleet, and then you're going to see allies. I want to mainly focus on ones that consider themselves subordinate to Luffy. These by nature, at least by the definitions I'm following, must be pirates. They must consider themselves by the final battle to be pirates. And or the world considers them to be pirates. That works as well. But I want to make sure that I'm exceptionally clear here. To become a member of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet required Luffy and the Grand Fleet members to share sake cups. They became brothers. It was a thing that was formally acknowledged. Not just simply groups of people that are friends that are working together, but they have acknowledged Luffy as their leader, even if they fly a different flag. Although the Grand Fleet really wanted to fly Straw Hat flags, but Luffy wasn't going to allow that. Ideally, I wanted to make both the Straw Hat crew and the Grand Fleet connect with every major group, faction, whatever in the story of One Piece, and I think that it is just very possible that that could happen. The other caveat, and this is going to be important as well, is that in order to be considered a Grand Fleet member, you must be a notorious pirate on your own. So you must have at least some time to build your reputation alone outside of the Straw Hat sphere. The Grand Fleet is currently doing that. They exist in the New World. They are currently doing things, making a name for themselves as individual crews. The reason that I've set this up this way is because my current headcanon, you can disagree with this, that's fine, but what I think is that the world is going to break before we get to the final battle. The rule of the world government is going to crumble, and you're going to start to see it fracture. It's going to become chaos, and this is going to lead to a lot of people heading to the sea and basically choosing a side. I expect even people who are not currently pirates or consider themselves to be pirates will soon become that before the final battle. You'll know what I mean when we get there. But it wasn't until Dressrosa that I became sure that every single major highlighted race is either going to be part of the crew or the Grand Fleet. Obviously, there's important narrative reasons for this, and this is one of the first subjects that I actually talked about on YouTube, which is racism in the world of One Piece and how it might relate to the Void Century. You can see that poneglyphs are being protected by non-human groups, Zoe and Minx, Fishman Island. I'm personally placing my bets that there's going to be a poneglyph of some kind in Elbaf with the Giants. Even the winged people of Shandia I would consider to be of another tribe. So I have it in my mind that the Ancient Kingdom was allies with, was friends for, and fought for all the various non-human groups, whereas you see that the Celestial Dragons nowadays continue to partake in slavery. And one of the big tickets that they'll spend big money for is slavery of non-human tribes. And this is not a new thing, this is a thing that they've always done, because we heard from the dwarves, the Tantata, that their era of slavery was initiated by the previous ruler of Dressrosa, the Don Quixote family, who later went on to become Celestial Dragons. So as the Ancient Kingdom seems to have a connection with all of these groups, so too do the Straw Hats. But foremost among them, the biggest connection it appears to be, is of course the Fishmen. We have a direct poneglyph of apology from Joy Boy to the Mermaid Princess. I've always thought of the Fishmen as to sort of represent the problem of slavery and racism in the world of One Piece. So then it always made sense to me that Jinbei, when it was first suggested that he would join, would actually join and sort of represent this on the crew. And then when the Grand Fleet was created, you start to fill out your roster. Oda can't make everybody part of the crew, it's just not possible. I'm sure that if he could, he would have added a crew member for each highlighted race. But it didn't work that way, so instead they go to the Grand Fleet. So you add the Tantata, you add the Dwarves, you add Hydrogen, you add the Giants, you add Long Legs and Long Arms. Coupled with Jinbei, you have the makings of a unified world already within the Strat Pirates itself. But even with the Fishmen, there's still some groups that are left out. One of which that we didn't know too much about until recently is, of course, the tribe, the race of Oni, which Yamato is a member. We don't know much about this, but the fact that Yamato joined the crew instead of the Grand Fleet, I know Yamato has an interesting story in and of itself, but along with Jinbei being a fishman and fishmen representing a certain kind of problem, I do wonder the role that Oni played during the Void Century. I kind of expect it to be a little bit more significant, and I hope that's part of the story. We obviously don't know too much, but just to throw a speculation out there, based on something that we do know, we get a slave list, a price list in Sabaody. On this list, you see a lot of named races. I presume that these are the ones that are more commonly found, ones that have relatively large numbers. But at the top of this list, they say other rare species. And you'll note that Oni is not on this list. So I think that Oni have to be very rare. And that could tell you a lot about the group by itself. So as Jinbei represents the fishman who represents this entire idea of slavery and racism, I think that Yamato and Oni represent this concept of rare species. One's essentially wiped from the map. In my mind, this separates the problem of, for instance, slavery from these rare species. They're so rare that slavery isn't a problem for them. This is like genocide, basically, right? So you could see how Yamato, even as a member of another tribe and part of the Strat crew, how she potentially represents something a little different. So other important tribes that fall within this blanket, right? Yamato represents this roles for other tribes such as Lunarians or the Three-Eyed Race. But to get to the point here, I think that Oda is going to continue to add to the Grand Fleet. Look at a tribe such as, or race such as the Minks. It seems poised. The Minks are important enough that you're likely to see the Minks join in the Strat Grand Fleet. And I think that this is going to happen through Carrot and Wanda. So I think sometime soon, Carrot and Wanda are going to decide to start their own crew, a Mink crew, which will be subordinate to the Strat Pirates. And they'll join the Strat Grand Fleet. This is the easy group to add, but we have some cool possibilities as well. Will there be somebody associated with the crew that is a member of the Three-Eyed tribe? The first example which comes to mind, and I personally believe, is that at some point in time, if not already, Big Mom will die. Thereby, Katakuri will inherit the role of responsibility for the Big Mom Pirates, and that includes pretty much every race, every remaining race that you could think of. Obviously, Pudding as well. But the fascinating thing about the majority of the Big Mom Pirates, particularly Big Mom's children, is none of them actually belong to the race that they are related to. Mainly because all of them are related to Big Mom. All of them associate their identities to Big Mom. And all of them are only half-blooded of whatever other race they belong to. Culturally raised not by this race, but by Big Mom. I personally think, in terms of organizing the story, the Big Mom Pirates represent all the mixed bloods, which is a group onto itself. So I do think that it is a realistic possibility that the Strats actually encounter the true race of Three Eyes and or Lunarians somewhere else hidden in the world of One Piece, so that the Strats may completely represent these groups as well. And another one that we want to mention here is Oars and the Continent Pullers. Where the hell they could hide in the world of One Piece is a question, but it would be insanely fitting for that to be the case. I almost expect it just because of the Whitebeard Pirates. Maybe Oars had a child, or maybe Oars is still alive. The last race that we want to talk about is the Winged People, Skypian, Shandian, and Birkin. I think that most people understand, or at least this is a theory that most people subscribe to, is that when it comes time to the final battle, pretty much everybody, every group that these Straw Hats have encountered and befriended throughout are going to be there. And it would be very weird if this didn't include Wiper and the Shandians. Right, that would be weird. Or Conus and Gonfall, Skypians. But with the Skypians and the Shandians, you have an interesting question. One I think is going to be very relevant in the story and leads to some very cool speculations. Why the heck would any of the Skypia ever involve themselves in a war on the Blue Sea. The Strahds definitely made friends with both the Skypians and the Shandians in a heartbeat, right? They should fight together. But how is it even possible for them to do so? Are they even aware of the news that's happening down below? Under what circumstances would they willingly travel to the Blue Sea? Why would that make sense? I think at some point in time, the battle down below has to affect those above. So my theory is that the Sky Islands are going to be destroyed, or at least threatened. How this happens is your guess as much as it is mine. Could the world government release something into the sky, or because of conflict in some way that starts deteriorating at the existence of these islands? Or another theory that we have is that the Sky Islands essentially rest on Treasure Tree Adam. The World Tree supports the Sky Islands in some way. Another cool theory, of course this isn't justified in any way right now, but it would be cool and it would make sense to me, is if Treasure Tree Adam gets cut down, leading literally everybody who lives in the sky to come down to the Blue Sea, also simultaneously bringing the world together. Oda has actually used this concept before in Skypiea, where the Skypians' island was destroyed, forcing them to live together on Jaya with the Shandians. It resolved their conflict, they come together, integration. That may happen with all of the Sky Islands. And I know that people say that it would be crazy if just insane. It wouldn't make any sense if Treasure Tree Adam was cut down, because we learned from Franky that Treasure Tree Adam's bark is essentially indestructible. That's what they made the Thousand Sunny out. That's what they made the Oro Jackson out of. That wood is too strong for the tree itself to get cut down. But I think that is possible. It really just depends on what Oda wants to do. We do know that they've been harvesting wood from this tree for a very, very long time, and it could actually be weakening the tree, such that an event like this, which may in the past have not been possible, is possible now. And you could have some serious symbolism and meaning about deforestation here. Cutting down a tree literally brings the world to ruin. But long story short, however it happens, I think that the Sky Islands are going to be in danger. This is going to lead people like Whitebird onto the Blue Sea, where they won't have a home, and they will be pirates, subordinate to the Strahds, part of the Grand Fleet. The last but not least is Tony Chopper. And while he's not technically a race, I think that Chopper represents all the animals of the entire world, because he is by birth an animal. Just gonna throw that in here now. So there's certain factions and or groups within the pirate world that I think are noteworthy enough that the Strahds need to include them within their sphere. And just like with the previous topic of races, we've seen this occur already. The prime example of this is the Shichibukai. We have a member on the crew already who was a former Shichibukai, Jinbei. The Shichibukai are a faction that the Straw Hats have integrated within themselves. The next pirate group that we want to talk about is we want to talk about the Supernova. So this is another point where I feel like I need to clarify, right? The Straw Hats work very differently from any other pirate crew. Luffy conquers no one. So to be a Grand Fleet member, they have to be spiritually aligned with the Straw Hats. They have to look up to them and basically make themselves subordinates. Obviously we could still get things in the story, but let's try to focus on Supernova, who I could actually argue as potentially joining the Grand Fleet. And the first and most obvious example of this is Trafalgar Law. As I've pretty much already said, I kinda think Law dies. If he survives, it's very obvious. That's where I stand. The crew that I would consider to have the second best odds and may join the Grand Fleet regardless is Capone Beige. Now Capone works in kind of the same way as Apu. Would he really consider the Straw Hats to be his superiors? By himself, maybe not. However, he is married to Chiffon. Chiffon, whose twin sister is Lola. Lola, who considers Nami to be her sister. We already get a sort of dynamic of their relationship, Capone and Chiffon, and it's kind of like Chiffon ultimately will call the shots. That's how I feel. How I feel the story will go is that the Big Mom Pirates and Big Mom are still relevant in the story, and so is Lola. Therefore, so is Chiffon and Beige. Big Mom will die. I think ultimately Lola joins Chiffon as part of that pirate crew. potentially with pudding as well. The next name I want to bring up is Eustace Kid. Yes, I do think that it is possible for Eustace Kid to subjugate himself, to choose to be subordinate to the Straw Hat Pirates. As it currently stands in the story, that does not make a whole lot of sense because Kid's will is not broken, but if any point in time that happens, I think that Kid has reason to look up to Luffy. However, those who follow the channel closely know that I've compared Eustace Kid to Bellamy. I think that their stories could be similar, and it's very interesting with Bellamy. The Straw Hat Grand Fleet was formed in Dressrosa. Bellamy knew this and consciously decided to not become a subordinate of Luffy, which is essentially the criteria which defines the Grand Fleet. Is Bellamy an ally? Yes. Is he a friend? Probably. Grand Fleet member? No. We're not going to get into all the details about what I think happens with Eustace Kid, but I think that we all know that he's going to fall short of his dreams. He's going to have every reason in the world to give up and just accept Luffy as king, and will never be. And I don't think that he will. I see end of story, Kid being the Whitebeard to Luffy's Roger. Something like that. He's never going to stop fighting. Therefore, he will never join the Grand Fleet. The next major division of pirates, the faction, I suppose you could call them, that is relevant in the story, is the Yonko. Just as with every other faction, I think that there will be at least one Yonko that joins the Grand Fleet. So let's cross some names off the list first. Blackbeard joins the Grand Fleet? I don't think so. Big Mom and Kaido? I think they both will die. Shanks. Shanks is an easy guess, kind of like Trafalgar Law, about a Yonko who might join underneath Luffy's wing, consider himself to be a subordinate. I personally think that Shanks dies, in kind of the same way that I think about Law. So which Yonko is going to join the Grand Fleet at some point in the future of the story? There's only one guess left, so you know what I'm gonna guess. Our main man, the champion of the people, the world's strongest, Buggy the Clown. I really do think that the topic of this video, the strats weaving threads through all the various faction and groups in the world of One Piece, bringing them under their wing to join the crew or the Grand Fleet, is a big reason why Oda decided to make Buggy into a Yonko. As crazy as that might sound, I also do think that it is realistic for Buggy to do this at some point in the future of the story. But similar to Capone Beige, right, we're gonna blur definitions here. I don't feel like I have to argue too hard that the seas are going to get rough in the future of the story. It's going to be all-out chaos, you would presume. And for someone like Buggy, right, Buggy is a poser. That's what he is. So you could make a video talking about how Buggy is insanely strong now, right? But until I see it, I believe that he is a poser. So his primary objective is survival. Buggy epitomizes fake it until you make it. So I think that he's going to be the one person who claims to be a Straw Hat Grand Fleet member, claims to be a subordinate of Luffy, because the idea of it helps protect him. I also think that it could be a great joke, which is kind of Buggy's role. But yeah, from here, the only things that we have left to discuss are the remaining pirate crews of former Yonko. Already speculated, I think Kaido, Big Mom, and Shanks die, Blackbeard, no. So, I do think that former Yonko pirate crews might join the Grand Fleet. Big Mom pirates, we've already talked about with Katakuri, I could see that. I'm not sure what remains of Kaido's crew. I really needed King to survive, because if King sort of took up the remaining Beast Pirates, you could see that as a Lunarian he would have a reason to join with Luffy. I also want a Lunarian to be part of the group, so if he survives, then you've essentially killed two birds with one stone. Without him, I really have no idea. And then we have Marco. I think that if Marco was going to die, he would have done so in this arc, but he didn't, so I think that he remains. So you have former Whitebeard pirates joining the Grand Fleet, and then with the remnants of Shanks' crew, if that is a thing, I really do not know. But if they are alive, then of course. So just as races are important in the world of One Piece, classes are equally important. And I think more than anything, this is the fight that the Revolutionary Army represents. But lines are blurred in every respect. There's no faction that is wholly associated with good or with evil. I think the best example of this is Sabo. Sabo was a noble who understood and really identified most with the poor. But that's not to say that certain factions don't create rotten people a little bit more often than others. Here's a quote from Sabo, which I find to be powerful. "This town smells worse than Gray Terminal. It smells like rotten people. If I stay here, I'll never be free. I'm ashamed to be born a noble. And a different quote, the thing I'm most afraid of is being consumed by this country and becoming a completely different person. The idea I gather is that being a part of the elite or the accepted changes you. But with every faction, no matter what, being gray or not totally black or white, I think the point of that is to avoid prejudice, even against groups that are overall the people that we are fighting. Ultimately, I think that the world that Oda is trying to aim for by the end of the story, the world that the Strats might create, is one that is mostly devoid of hate. Or at least, Oda's going to do everything in his power to eliminate this. And this includes for even people like celestial dragons. And the way that I think that Oda is going to accomplish this again is the Straw Hat Pirates. The Straw Hat Pirates are going to be connected to literally everyone. So at least you have one example of whatever faction or group in a good light. So essentially right now we are talking about the elites, the royals, the nobles, those sorts of people. I think that the Straw Hats are going to be connected in various ways to nobles from literally everywhere. And so we already have some examples from the crew itself. Sanji is a Vinsmoke. Vinsmokes at one point in time conquered or ruled the entirety of the North Blue. Sanji is a prince. Just like previous examples, I think the Straw Hats have one crew member who sort of represents an entire group. And I think that Sanji represents various kingdoms or rulers of the 4 blues. That's the one that is on the Straw Hat crew. But I think that we're going to have rulers from the 3 other blues that are in the Straw Hat Grand Fleet itself. So from the South Blue, we have the team of Kuma and Jewelry Bonnie. I purposefully ignore Jewelry Bonnie in the Supernova section because I think that she's more important as a noble. To take this even further, I wouldn't be surprised to see if the Revolutionary Army lost but Sabo survived. Sabo essentially convert himself to being a pirate rather than a revolutionary. So here, Sabo could be your ruler or your royalty, your noble from the East Blue as well. The West Blue is a little bit more tricky, but I'm going to try something a little bit different here. Obviously, we don't know, right? But just a different storyline is that Sai, who is already a member of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, becomes the king of Kano Country. Kano Country, if you're not aware, is a hyped-up kingdom that seems inspired by Chinese culture. They currently have a king who is not Sai. Sai is a member of the Jinjiao family. However, I think after the result of this war, there may be many rulers who die for one reason or another, and I think that Sai is going to be chosen by the people of Kano to be the new king by the conclusion of the story. Personally, I like the way that I've organized this because everybody adds something slightly different. You have a noble, so not a true king in Sabo. You have a former prince in Sanji, whose country used to rule over the entirety of the North Blue. You have a current king when you're talking about Kuma and Jewelry Bonnie, and then you have a future king in Sai. Yeah, I like that. But of course, the 4 blues aren't the only ones which have royalty. I think that we'll see this for the Grand Line as well, separated into its 2 parts, Paradise and the New World. We already have a member of the Grand Fleet who is royalty from the Grand Line, specifically from Paradise, and that is Cavendish. Cavendish is formerly the Prince of Bourgeois, and it's stated that the reason why he's no longer a prince is he became too popular. With the New World, I feel it's even easier. Possibly there are too many candidates. For instance, Rebecca and King Riku, if they showed up into the final battle with an armada, they would definitely consider themselves to be subordinate of Luffy, you would imagine, which would technically make them Grand Fleet members and they're already friends. The same would be true of Momonosuke as well. There may be others, so Poseidon and King Neptune being one. There's a lot of choices here, but I do want to mention that Oda has, throughout the story, started to build the connections of Straw Hats. Even though this was something that a lot of people initially didn't want, or maybe they still don't want, this is a thing that is actively happening. Sanji recently became the king of the North Blue, or prince of the North Blue, right? Zoro is in line for something very similar. You cannot convince me that Zoro is not related to Ryuma, and Shimotsuke Ushimaru as well. That's a daimyo, that's royalty, that fits for this criteria. Actually, between Zoro and Sanji, you have a ruler, a former ruler of one of the blues, and then you have a former ruler royalty from the Grand Line. But of course, you know that I want to spice it up just a little bit. We haven't talked about Vivi. Vivi is obviously a ruler, royalty from Alabasta Kingdom. Alabasta is interesting because it was one of the 20 kingdoms which founded the world government. They just never left to go to Marijois, which technically makes Vivi a celestial dragon. The way that I see the story going is I think that Alabasta Kingdom is going to be one of the first ones to fall because of the world government reacting to the changing landscape of the world. They know that Vivi sailed with the Strats. Vivi likely is going to work against their interests, and so I could see them trying to capture Vivi or something happening with her, which is currently happening in the story as well with Saba. We just don't know exactly what it is. And let's also take a moment to remind you guys that Imu had a portrait of Vivi along with Blackbeard, Luffy, and Shirahoshi. So Vivi is important. So the reason that Vivi couldn't travel with the Strats despite the invitation, despite wanting to, is her duties to her country. So I think what's going to happen is that her duties to her country are going to essentially involve herself joining the Strats. That is how she can fulfill her role as princess, as queen. So she will actually join the Strat pirate crew itself. She will sail on the main ship. And at the same time, she will occupy this role of bringing everybody together, occupy this role of celestial dragon. But I just want to throw this out in the dark. I know that there's not a whole lot to justify this, but I wouldn't be surprised to see another member of the crew or the Grand Fleet have direct ties to the Celestial Dragons. More so, one of the Celestial Dragons that at some point in time did actually live in Marijois. There's no extremely great guesses as to who this could potentially be, because most of the Celestial Dragons are nobodies, right? There's some good ones like Mosgard, but you know, the ones that could actually be pirates. Doflamingo, definitely not. So my shot in the dark here is that it's possible that Luffy is related to a family that actually lived at some point in Marijois. Basically, dragon married into a celestial dragon family. Or some other complicatedness to add even more hype to Luffy. You don't have to like this, and I'm not going to justify it too much, I'm just throwing it out there. It definitely does make sense to me that as the Straw Hats themselves are going to bring the world together, that Luffy himself represents two halves of divided factions. For instance, the Void Century we know was a fight between the Ancient Kingdom, probably the Family D, and the 20 Kingdoms or the Celestial Dragons. So then he could be one person that is related to both of them. A child of a D and of a Celestial Dragon. Hypothetically. But we're not actually done with this section. We have one more insane speculation for you. I've kind of already laid this out in this video, but the world isn't just simply divided by the four blues, the two halves of the Grand Line, and then the Red Line or Marijois. There is one other distinct area of the world, and that is the Sky Islands. This is totally headcanon in theory, but I imagine an entire world exists up there, far more than any of us have predicted. I think that Oda has laid a trap, and that trap is the winged people. We associate the winged people as the residents of the Sky Island. But I don't think that's the case. And if we go back to Elbaf speculations, right, there's theories that the giants live on top of the tree in Elbaf, which extends into the Sky Island. So now you have giants and you have winged people. But why not more than that? I think that this is alluded to actually in Skypiea itself, where you see Enel. Enel is very curious, because he is not of the winged race. He has no wings. It appears as if he is a normal human. What is a normal human doing in these islands which have been settled by winged people? The answer that I've come to is that he simply, or his family simply, traveled there and settled there. Gonfall tells us that there is a normal way to travel to Skypiea, the summit of High West. It essentially paints this picture that even though Skypiea may be on this very edge of the Sky Islands, that they're all interconnected. You can travel between them all, and it's quite a great distance. It's a whole world. A world I think that the world government has not been able to influence or conquer, because my theory is that the gate, the way to get up to it that would be easiest that you could imagine actually taking place, is guarded by the giants of Elbaf. So I think that this area could potentially surpass our imaginations and could be much more diverse than you think that it is. Meaning essentially that I'm speculating that there are entire villages or kingdoms or islands of regular humans that live up in the sky. essentially royalty of the sky. And I have a theory as to who could be a part of the crew or the Grand Fleet which would fulfill this criteria. We've already talked about how Oda is building up the reputations of the actual Straw Hat members themselves. He's giving them connections slowly to important groups of people or past events in some way. As I speculate this for Zoro, I speculate this for essentially every remaining Straw Hat, even if we don't know the answer yet. But my theory is that Nami is descended from royalty that lived up in the sky. I think most here know the story of Nami, but Nami was a baby on a war-torn country. There was a fight between the Marines and somebody else, and Bellemere happened to find her. But what's clear from the story is that Nami has a lot of unexplained talent, and I think that this offers prime opportunity for her to be connected in some way to a powerful lineage. Being royalty from the Sky Islands would explain a lot, and there's a couple things that could be seen as hints if this is true. For instance, during the 2-year time skip, Kuma sent Nami to a Sky Island. But even more than this, and this is the real evidence which substantiates this in my mind, is we learn about waivers when we get to Skypiea, and it's explained by Conus, like, it took me 10 years to figure out how to ride a waiver. And as she says this, Nami picks it up immediately, which baffles both Conus and Paglia. I think that Nami was able to pick it up immediately because she is by lineage from the Sky Islands. And we know that waivers aren't new technology, it's old technology, because Mont Blanc Nolan talked about waivers in his experience and his adventures hundreds of years in the past. Overall, you get the sense, and this hasn't been confirmed, but you get the sense that traveling the Sky Islands may be even more difficult than traveling on the Grand Line, requiring greater navigational skills. Nami, as she is writing the waiver, points out how her specific talents help her command the waiver. And I think that she has these specific talents because she's from a bloodline that was very good at adventuring in the Sky Islands. The only question that we have is, if Nami is by lineage from the Sky Islands, how did she end up on the Blue Sea? This could be an insanely good story that could add to the world building of the Sky Islands if Oda chooses. Obviously, all we can do at this point is throw darts at the wall, but, like for instance, maybe the giants from Elbaf climbed up the tree at some point recently, so they weren't always in the Sky Islands. It was previously populated by other people. Once the giants like Loki got up there, they started conquering the Sky Islands, including whatever kingdom or island that Nami's family was from. So to save Nami, they escaped and snuck her to the Blue Sea. That could be cool. But there's a place within the Straw Hat sphere for government factions as well. Government factions, what am I talking about? I'm talking about Marines, I'm talking about Cypherpole, potentially talking about Sword. I don't want to divvy up the Marines into like admirals, vice admirals, that sort of thing. Not going to do that. Also, not including the Gorosei. Sorry. But I think that we have some good speculations here as well. A Marine that is either a part of the Straw Hat crew or the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. I think that a lot of people will probably guess Kobe, because Kobe and Luffy are already friends. But that's not my guess. My guess is Smoker. A lot of people sort of imagine in-game, who is Roger's Garp, right? Is it Kobe or is it Smoker? And for me, it isn't much of a question. Roger's Garp is for sure currently Smoker. The whole idea of Roger and Garp's relationship is that Roger did all this crazy stuff and Garp essentially chased him around the New World. They battled a few times, but there was never a decisive victor, and then at the end of the story, when Roger turned himself in, you realize that Roger had earned a friend. I think the very same thing is going to happen with Smoker, and it's very different from Kobe, for instance. Kobe kind of came out of the box as a friend, but Smoker has been following the Strats from the very beginning of the story. They've clashed multiple times, and more than any Marine in the entire story, Smoker has reason to believe in the Strats' goodness, and the Straw Hat's justice. Smoker, more than any other Marine, knows all of the evidence which suggests that the Strats are helping the world and they are fighting against evil, which should be what the Marines do. And at the same time, while Smoker is doing this, he is finding out things that probably he wished he didn't know. I think that Smoker's story, even though we don't know how much stronger he is now or is going to be, I think that it is essentially the same as Garp. He is gaining in rank as the Strats do, gaining in notoriety. I think that he has a massive power-up in store for him, perhaps once he awakens his Devil Fruit. At some point he will become Admiral level. It's also additionally possible that if an Admiral goes down, that Smoker is offered the opportunity to become one. But he'll make the choice that Garp never did, which is to switch sides. But he won't believe in pirates in general. I don't think that he trusts pirates in general. The only pirate crew that he trusts, that he knows is good, is the Strat Pirates. And I think that sometime soon he will be heavily involved in some arc again related to the Strats. But this will be the final time that Smoker will ever be considered to be an enemy. Next up we have Sword, and why not just use Kobe here, right? Like, Kobe, if ever shit hits the fan, is most definitely going to side with Luffy because Luffy is on the side of what is right? And so if Kobe ever did this, then he would obviously be a subordinate of Luffy. Likely he'll have his own ship at this point, so a subordinate captain. I would, however, like for Kobe's switch to be much later in the story, and for there to be another member of Sword associated with the Strats. I'm not going to speculate this, but I'm just throw that out there. That would be cool. Actually, I will throw out a name. X-Drake. X-Drake we know is a member of Sword. Could also see him becoming a true ally of the Strats, and also is already incognito, in disguise as a pirate. And of course, there's another theory related to this about Law, that Law might secretly be a member of Sword. So if he survives, which again, I don't believe, but if he does, then he could fulfill that criteria as well. If that theory is true, which is, big if, I get it. Just saying. And last but not least, we need a member of Cypherpole, either a part of the crew or a part of the Grand Fleet. This one is a really intriguing speculation. I think that most people are probably going to guess that I'm going to guess Lucci, but I am not. So it's like, who could it be, right? And that's what's so exciting about Cypherpole. Same thing with Sword, is we already have confirmation that this group is fully capable of trained to change their identities. We see in Water 7 that the Galileo shipwrights, many of them, are agents of Cypherpole, agents that have been deep undercover for years. Essentially, you would never know until they started revealing their cards. We see the same thing is true with Stussy. Stussy, who was a member of the Underground, but also a member of CP0. So it's very clear the precedent has been set that they can literally be anywhere. So who is my guess? Another shot in the dark, but I'm going to shoot my shot. My guess is Bartolomeo. Now, there's nothing concrete here that it can actually lend towards any speculation, but when thinking about somebody who could be an agent of Cypherpole, you have to assume that they're living some sort of false identity. And the one character who I look at as having kind of a sketchy story is Bartolomeo. I don't really think that I need to explain this, right? It's a joke, so because it's funny, it doesn't necessarily need to make sense, but at the same time, it kind of doesn't make too much sense. At the same time, every member of the Strat Grand Fleet and the crew has ties, associations, or will have them to all the major factions that we could imagine. Talking specifically about the Grand Fleet, right, you have several members that are associated to the various tribes. You have a full-blown admiral who also associate as like the human guy. And then you have a prince. But Bartolomeo is just kind of there, like, who are you? What is the grand scheme importance? Did Oda really need to devote a Grand Fleet crew member to, like, a fan club? I suppose at the end of the day, if Oda wants to make more out of it, he could. If Bartolomeo came out as a member of Cypherpole, that the government sort of understood early on that Luffy was a person worthy of following, that he was a person of interest, so had an undercover Cypherpole agent track his journey, such that he could potentially join Luffy in the future as an undercover spy, it works for me. But as this is about bringing the world together and not being betrayed, I think that there has to be, that whoever the Cypherpole agent has to be in this case, has to actually end up loyal to Luffy by the end of the story. And I could see that with Bartolomeo as well.